special board meeting this Wednesday, July 20th. The printer is down, so you can see up here any of the notes and information that we will discuss, or you may have brought some from home. Kelly, can you please do a roll call?
Sure. Tyler Kinley.
Present.
Jessica Lita.
Here.
Milton Devoni.
Here.
Jeannie Kim.
Here.
Alex D.
Here.
Micah Bertoni.
Here.
Mike Michelin.
Here.
Darren McKinnon. Jonathan Massey. You have a quorum.
Thank you. The purpose of the meeting today is for the executive committee to provide a summary of the special committee meeting that we held on Friday, July 15th, where we conducted the 6-month 360 performance review for the DDA director, Jeff Watson, as authorized by the DDA board recent resolution. The board will also discuss the 12-month review timeline for Mr. Watson and how best to manage the executive director review process as a whole moving forward. So today's process is discussion of results and next steps. I think we've got the agenda. If you could bring the agenda up just so we can approve it. Do I have a motion to approve the board meeting agenda?
So moved.
I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor of approval of the board meeting agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, please say nay. Approval passes for the board meeting agenda. Okay, move forward. Kelly, the next part. What we'll do first is to go through the summary of the 6-month performance review. Up in front of us, you'll see a summary that GA helped provide and I helped just take a look at, but it basically reviews the meeting that we had on the 15th, where we reviewed the feedback acquired from the 360 review. The 360 review was an anonymous survey that was created by the executive team, specifically GA and Jess really authored it. It had a number of questions that had a scale of 1 to 5, and that would indicate.
Yeah, if I can jump in.
Sure, please.
If you scroll down the agenda to the scoring system page, it shows there you go.
Yeah, exactly. And my fellow board members, I'm summarizing, but feel free to jump in and add detail. The purpose of today is to simply make sure everyone understands what we did, what we discussed, and can sort of digest it. You can see up here the scoring system. 1 is sort of less and 5 is more. In each system there's a frequency, so frequency almost never up to nearly always. Ability, 1 is clear weakness, up to 5 clear strength, and effectiveness, 1 is 1 to 20%, and 5 is 81 to 100%. So that gives you an idea of sort of the measuring scale of the scoring system. If you move to the spider diagram, Kelly.
And before we get too deep into details, if I could just do a real high-level overview, Mike.
Yeah, please.
So we, after a series of actions, the DDA has never really gone through a hiring process like this before. So as I mentioned earlier, we've been doing a series of firsts. Mr. Watson joined us in January of this year. And what we decided was that we were going to do a 6-month review process in addition to a 12-month review process so that we could start to understand timelines. How do we need to put together the material? What do we need to create in order to be able to do this? So what we're looking at is a 360 review that was pulled together from the job description, from staff feedback, from board suggestions, and then that was disseminated. And I think that covers kind of where we've been to up to today. And I just wanted to check in to see if you had any process questions before we got into the meat of the matter.
No, but I do appreciate that.
For sure.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that's helpful. And yeah, Kelly?
No, sorry, just talking to the.
Oh, okay, yep. It's wonderful having you here because it gives us sort of a pullback to sort of make sure we're covering the overarching themes for anyone and everyone. So that gives you an idea of the process, which really leaned into the 360 review as a way to let people answer and document sort of an apples to apples across the board. We went out to, it went to staff, board, and numerous outside stakeholders. How many respondents do we have total? I believe we got.
We requested 29 or 30 and we got 22.
Yeah, it was a strong response. Here you can see where the scoring fell. I believe it's black line indicates the aggregate score of outside feedback, and the other color represents the self-score from the executive director himself. You can see these things aligning pretty closely. You can digest it as you look. As you continue to sort of take this in, I'll review the additional aspect, which is open comments that were solicited.
Could we, I'm sorry,
Please.
if you don't mind if I jump in?
Yeah.
I'd like to go to the next one because we all process the information differently.
Sure.
This is the same information, just presented in not as a diagram, but as a chart. So you can see that there's 6 different categories: leadership, integrity, communication, operational management, financial management, and board management. And again, the Jeff self-score is in orange, and rest of the survey aggregate score is in black.
Perfect. And others continue to chime in. Feel free. This is just to make sure everyone understands. And yeah, that we do take it in differently, so that's helpful. And we don't have printouts, so if you have any questions, just chime right in. In addition to the scoring, there were also 3 questions that solicited open comments. The 3 questions were as follows. What are some things that Jeff Watson does well that supports and enhances the work of the DDA? What are some areas in which Jeff Watson can improve? And what else do you think the DDA board would find helpful in evaluating Jeff Watson's performance? Now, one aspect of today's meeting was to ensure that we didn't simply double up the work of the executive committee. The executive committee went through and reviewed this in great detail. We don't want to review the review today in great detail. We want to provide the summary and then discuss the results of the summary and the next steps within this group. So what I'll do next is read the key takeaways from the discussion. This is between the executive committee and Jeff Watson that occurred last week. I'll go through. The overall scores by self and others are lower than hoped for and presents an opportunity for improvement. Mr. Watson shared that a few personal matters disrupted his workday and impacted his performance as a whole during the first few months of his tenure here. He reiterated that this was a temporary issue. Since it has been resolved, his focus has improved and it will not impact his performance going forward. Jeff Watson has been reaching out to the community partners and peers at other agencies that has been received positively. He is open to feedback and has worked on a greater level of collaboration with the staff. Timely, open, and informative communication and building trust is one major area for improvement. His communication with women needs improvement, as there was outside feedback that he had come across misogynistic. We discussed impact over intent, especially because the position requires working with people of diverse and dynamic backgrounds and a need for diversity, inclusion, and equity training. This 6-month review is unusual in the sense that most organizations do a yearly review, and that's based on talking to other groups that are similar throughout the county and area, that our 6-month review is not the norm, but that it has proven to be helpful in this instance. Due to lack of systems within the current DDA and the guidance for the ED position, this was a good place to start, and the executive committee acknowledges that Jeff Watson is early on in his tenure and is looking forward to Mr. Watson's improved performance. Are there any questions?
Any reactions and feedback from the board?
Sure. Still taking it in. As for the next bit, Jeff did provide a 6-month update. I believe within this packet, unfortunately it's not printed out, you can see he provided a 2022 priorities list.
Yeah, so if I may jump in.
Sure.
A few months ago, the executive committee asked Jeff to really focus on 2 major goals for the first 6 months. One is to reach out to the greater community and establish himself as the head of the spokesperson of DDA. And I think the 360 review and anecdotal information says that that has been done and it has been received positively. And then the second one was to work with the city HR on structure and compensation of the DDA staff. He informed us that that's on progress and he expects to hear back with the result in 2 weeks. And then he provided the document, which is to inform what else he's been working on in the past 6 months and then what he would like to focus on going forward for the 12-month point.
You can scroll through. The priorities list is thorough and lengthy. And I think one of the places of feedback that the executive committee provided is that it is a thorough and rich list of priorities, but that a good next step would be to create a timeline for sort of what are the actual next steps that we're going to tackle as a DDA and a priorities list within this, because it's a lot. The next steps to be discussed amongst all of us here are the 12-month review timeline, the next steps and outcomes from this review. So are there next steps based on the feedback we've gotten within this? And a bit of a larger discussion on the role and responsibilities of the board within this review process. The review process itself was, I think, successful, but made successful in large part because of very heavy lifts, specifically from Jihei and Jess. And the process itself, there's a question as to whether it should be placed on the board itself to do, or whether we should seek outside HR to sort of spearhead future reviews, specifically city HR. So these are all areas for discussion today. So within the purview of what we'll discuss, it's pretty much 3 things: the 12-month review timeline, so setting ourselves up for a better success for the 12-month review, the next steps and outcomes of this specific review based on the summary provided and the scoring sheets, and then finally the discussion on the roles and responsibilities of the board within it. So let's start with the let's start with next steps and outcomes of this review. Would any other members of the board like to speak?
Well, I can start.
Sure.
I think everybody agreed during the executive meeting for Jeff's review that overall scores were disappointing. Like, numbers were, I think the highest numbers barely crept 3, and that's one area, and the rest of the area was below 3, and that's a self-assessment as well as for others. And we discussed Jeff coming up with some action steps to improve his own performance. And then we also discussed possible diversity, inclusion, equity training for DDA team. So those are 2 specific things that was discussed but have not been decided because we wanted to bring this here first.
I think the scores may be anecdotally related to the fact that the review took place in 6 months. People at Jeff's level, at the executive level, they are not typically reviewed in 6 months, particularly if they move from somewhere else to get settled. It's not a sufficient timeline to evaluate what their performance is. I know I supported us doing it and participated in the process, but if there is a concern about it, performance reviews are permanent parts of your record, and it's a little tricky and quasi-dangerous to have in your file within 6 months there's a document that says you need improvement. So when you go on in your career, if someone sees that, that's a flag, and it's an inadvertent flag because we did it, I think, prematurely. But here's where we are now. I want to be transparent about my feelings about it. But I'm very optimistic about the choice that we've made to lead the organization and want to do my part to help make sure it's successful.
I want to respond to that and say that I'm going to reiterate again that the board agreed to the 6-month review, and it did reveal some concerning things because Jeff himself admitted that there were personal issues that was really impacting his performance. So I think it was informative, and that we can even put it in the record that we consider this as a starting point, because we didn't really have any systems for any kind of oversight. I think Susan reviewed herself, which is definitely not sufficient, and she was in her position for 2 decades? Yeah. And it was part of the discussion during Jeff's hiring process that we would do this because there was no set expectations or guidance for the ED position to be really successful based on the previous processes.
And
Is our intent now to evaluate him 6 more months from now?
Only because that's a year point, and then it will be a yearly, not necessarily 6 month. I feel like the 6 month, every 6 months would be a waste of resources for us.
And less of a process point, but to clarify part of the discussion at the executive committee last week, we mentioned the personal issues challenging Jeff in his first time here. Part of that was because of the relocation. To be clear, the problem wasn't the issues. The problem was the communication and the board not having a sense of where Jeff was struggling. And that's, the 360 aside, Jeff himself marked himself fairly low. And so understanding what resources are needed, what support is needed, what communication is needed, that was really kind of where the conversation focused. And I just wanted to clarify that. Does that jive with y'all's understanding of the conversation?
And I also want to point out that the review had an option of not applicable for people who felt that it was too early or didn't have enough involvement, and those scores didn't factor into the aggregate score.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
In response, I understand the, hesitation to do a 6-month review for an executive level position as well. And I think that's a fair sort of assessment at a high level. Here, frankly, I'm very glad that we did a 6-month review because it did address some things that I think required addressing. And I think it leaves, especially the executive committee, with a confidence in Jeff going forward that required some communication, some additional communication that I think was brought about from the process. And I feel very confident in Jeff's future tenure, in part because we did a review.
Personally, the score sort of surprised me, in more so in Jeff's self-score than others' self-score. And I think it shows that
if a 12-month review, which it sounds like is going to happen in some form potentially, at this point, I guess, are the next steps clear, I guess, to the executive committee on, was there enough, I guess, between the review and the feedback that was given, is there enough there to give Jeff direction and move forward, or is that partially the discussion now?
Partially discussion.
Okay,
now.
got it.
And I think that one of the positive outcomes out of this is that Jeff was, Jeff shared his excitement in building the next steps to, I don't know, better performance, or because he agreed that distractions are no longer there, and he understands that we are supporting him in better performance, and we don't necessarily have to micromanage him because he offered to come with a plan, which we didn't hear from him before. And I personally did have concerns, and I believe that this is a better way to address it than, I don't know, chatter or any kind of questions that are not being openly communicated, that may not have been addressed for the entire 12 months.
I'm with you, and I understand that, but I think our job as a board then should have been to identify those in the open as well, those points that we wanted. Otherwise it's unfair to address them in the open if we didn't even set that expectation as a board. And so I think that was, when we started the 6-month review, I thought part of it too was we've got to identify as a board what we want this policy, and I think that has come about as well. But
And I also want to say that the expectations were drawn, well, the survey questions as well as expectations are drawn from the job descriptions that was posted for the search. So none of the questions were really a surprise.
Yeah, I'll be honest, I'm a little surprised that the scoring here, both the feedback scores and Jeff's personal scores, are met with the, I guess, questioning that the process might have been incorrect. To me, when we saw the scores, I think they provided really necessary discussion points with Jeff. And I don't know that we would have gotten those things purely anecdotally. I think that they were pretty necessary. And personally, I think some of the issues that came up here, while they are scores that they are in the record, they needed to be raised, and they probably would not have been received or known in any way just by board oversight. And I think our being in the review process allows us to see more deeply into the feedback received. But I do want to reiterate, I still strongly support the fact that this occurred. I think the fact that this occurred is going to set up the DDA and Jeff for a lot of future success, because it raised things that I think will benefit Jeff greatly in the long run.
And to speak to your process point a little bit, Alex, I know what you mean, and sometimes you have to build the bus as you drive it, which is a little bit what this felt like. The intention that we as an executive committee articulated earlier this year was to do a 6-month process based on 2 goals, both of which were articulated to Jeff really early on: relationships and the to-do list that staff had basically waiting the day that he came in. So it was to evaluate stuff that wasn't really a surprise, and I would say not necessarily a stretch for the position, and to use the 6 to 12 month time as a time for the board to be more engaged in understanding what the review process would look like going forward. So it was a way of building systems, a lot of which we've done, that gets kind of the clunky administrative work out of the way so that we can do those big thoughts. I hear you, like you said, hindsight is 20/20, but I just wanted to kind of say that part of this is going exactly as it should, which is we do want the larger board conversation about what this looks like.
Yeah, I think the feedback is obviously very good and very, like, summarized very well, and so you can't negate that all that happened, that's good and all, like you said, now you've had conversations that put us on there, so I think that's right. It's just more like evaluating somebody, but we all agreed to it, to Nelson's point, we all agreed, so I guess we have to calibrate as we go on. But yeah, no, I agree, it was a great job and a great administrative hallway, you and Jay.
So coming out of this, I think when we chatted, one of the points that we discussed was especially the impact versus intent discussion, and some education around how Jeff Watson was able to communicate, and how he could in the future communicate in a way that his impact matched his intent better, to marry those things. I think that was some of the feedback received. I think the executive committee did discuss some form of education in that realm, and I'd be curious to hear what the board thinks about that as an outcome from this review. If there's any, or if it's recommended, or...
So to summarize, my understanding as we came out of last week's executive committee meeting, we were going to look to Jeff for plans around improved communication, around sensitivity training, starting with self and then expanding to staff and the board. The priority list that you have, kind of laying that against a timeline and turning it into a work plan. And then over the next few months, understanding what the goals for 12 months and beyond look like. So big ideas more than to-do lists. That was my understanding coming out of last week, just to kind of summarize.
And if I can make a suggestion separate from that, is that in terms of communication, a lot of information came about because of the review. I think it's more ideal that, like, if there was like a better sort of schedule or process for Jeff to report out more detailed, I don't know, work process that he's doing, which wasn't really offered, nor did we ask for. But so maybe figuring something like that out would be a good way to aid better communication.
And I'd be curious if there are any practices at the city that would stand us in good stead here.
It's a little different because of the level of position that he's in. I think based on how the discussion is going this morning, it might be worth considering that every 2 or 3 months at the end of our regular meeting, we go into a closed session with the full board just to check in with him. How's it going? How are things working? Is there support that you need that we don't know about? Are there issues you want to make us aware of? So then we have the dialogue. It's not part of an evaluation, it's part of a communication. And he can say what issues or things that he wants to champion, and we can say, hey, that's great, or here's something else we'd like for you to take a look at. That way, the sensitivity around the 6-month, 12-month, and not going a period of time without knowing, the check-in session should be instructive for both parties. But that should be a closed discussion between the board and him.
I think there's a couple responses. One, I think that increased communication of that kind, and that to achieve that kind of goal of the board understanding where Jeff's at is great. Having tried to find ways to have closed meetings has proven to be much more challenging than I ever expected. Kelly just raised her hand. I'm sure she has an input on when we can and can't go into closed meetings.
Yeah.
Do you want to chime in?
Just for check-ins or to talk about those, wouldn't that qualify the Open Meetings Act or
Yeah.
closed session?
That's the challenge. The response I would have then is that Jeff and I did talk, and the executive committee sort of talked, that his communication with the executive committee and with the chair, so myself, will increase. And so our communication can, I think, achieve a lot of those goals. I can disseminate things to the board. Jeff can chat with us as the executive committee to try to achieve that and hopefully achieve sort of what you're getting at. Does that make sense?
It does.
Board, any more thoughts?
Are we trying to decide some solid next steps?
We are.
Or are we just finishing up discussing it?
Well, I think some of the we're again, this is a bit of us figuring out exactly what we'd like to do coming out of this review process. If there is a resolution to have any next steps that the board will say these are the next steps that will be done. If there are any, they can be, presumably they can be recommendations or mandates.
Well, what about, just kind of following the train of the conversation, what about inviting Jeff to bring suggested steps for next forward to the next executive committee meeting?
That's a great.
Is that specifically on the training or education part, or just overall?
Specific in response to the review, so the communication, the work plan, and the
All that,
training.
okay, yeah.
Mhm. So, it's,
For my part, I feel like we have a pretty solid list of recommendations, both some recommendations and some direct asks in terms of having Jeff come with, the improved communication plan as well as the timeline attached to the priorities here. So I think for my part, I'd like to see both of those in the next, whenever it's appropriate, the executive or board meeting. And, the recommendation that the additional training is sought and procured. So seeing some steps towards getting that. I believe that this kind of wraps up what we had talked about at AC.
Yeah, I personally was really encouraged to hear Jeff offer to come up with the next steps. So I'd love to have him take a first crack at it.
Seems like there's relative board agreement here that we'll ask Jeff to come to the next executive committee with his plan, and that would be for increased communication, for a timeline of the next priorities list, correct?
Mhm.
And for his thoughts on the DEI, and probably just sensitivity training. Do we all feel good with that? That would not be, in my understanding, a resolution, but simply a communicated expectation.
Just as a point of consideration, the executive committee is authorized by the board to do Jeff's review, but the executive committee is not authorized to direct Jeff in his duties. That's the full group. So that's something we might consider. The executive committee might have a role in kind of working through that, but it should be the whole board that considers direction for the executive director in his duties.
I mean, that's what we're doing here, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, but I guess I was speaking to the conversation about coming back to executive committee to work that out.
Got it.
And I just making the point that executive committee might then bring that to the board for consideration.
Yeah, I think the goal was to receive the communication at executive committee
Yeah.
and then bring that in a form to the board and not make any actions at an executive committee with that information.
Yes, yeah, it's just about considering what the executive committee's authority is.
Thanks for the distinction. Sarah's our Robert's rules and general
Yeah.
keeping us on track.
Yeah.
Yeah.
that would make the issues I was raising a few minutes ago make perfect sense. The full board needs to be involved in the direction versus a subset. The other comment I would make is we're in a unique position in that Jeff happens to be following a 20-year leader, which is unusual in and of itself. And when one person, even if they were great, has been doing something for 20 years, the culture tends to be, this is how we do it. And so anyone coming in after that, if you move a cup 6 inches, you're going against an established culture. So do you have the opportunity to not only mesh within the organization, but also justifiably review and question, is this the best way for doing something? And sometimes that's met with some resistance because it's different from what we've been doing. It doesn't make it wrong, it's just, and so that begs for patience to let the new person sort of get their legs under them, make their own assessment of the best way to go forward in collaboration with staff, and then the organization benefits from it.
So, if I may respond to that, Milton, I want to respect, I agree with you in general, but we did not want to speak in generality, and that's where the review system came in, because I wanted to personally know what the specific things that were roadblocks to Jeff's success, what were the specific things that weren't being really great, and what were the specific things that were really not good that needs improvement. And I think that that's a lot of generalization and assumption to say that you move a cup 6 inches and it will not be received well when we do not have solid data for that. And that was the intent of the 6-month review, to really see if that's the case or not. And I think if the self-score and the other score were different, I would be more inclined to believe that maybe that was what was going on. But even the self-score was not where we wanted it to be. So I don't think it's just, and Jeff himself said that he needed more support and help and had personal struggles. So I think if we can just focus on specific outcomes of this review to help us move along to go forward, then generalization that it's difficult to come into an old organization and maybe there's some resistance. While that maybe probably true, I think we're beyond that point of discussion, personally.
I'll also note something that's difficult to see in the documents. In the 2022 priorities list that's part of our agenda, I think the first 14 were the ones that Jeff came into the organization, like these are the things that need to be done. And the rest of them are areas of opportunity that he's identified for the organization, and they're really more strategic, right? Like it's strategic direction, it has to do with our environmental work, our justice work, and so one of the reasons that I was interested in the work plan is to start to understand how are we pivoting away from the checklist to the vision work, and especially like the policy and strategy work that we as a board should be doing here, and how do we support the staff in that work. So if we're talking about things that we're encouraged about and that's a part of the work going forward, it's things that Jeff himself is identifying that are reflective of value statements that the board has made, that the work that the staff is already doing. So that's there as well. It's just it's hard to see in there.
And the review itself points to greater level of collaboration between Jeff and the staff in the later months.
Like an improvement, do you think?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Well, that's great.
Yeah.
And then, like you said, quantifiable because of this
Right.
Yes.
review that you did.
Exactly. I feel like you could disagree with me here. There's general consensus on Jeff will come to the executive committee with his own plan to respond to what we've asked for. I don't believe we need a resolution for that. It can simply be communicated in an expectation. We're all good?
And then executive committee will report back to the full board.
Yes. So let's discuss the 12-month review timeline, and as part of that, the roles and responsibilities of the board within that timeline. We still expect to do a 12-month review. That will become the annual review going forward. Presumably, this first one will be the first of many that follow the same process each time. The process for this was very board intensive. There were questions Micah specifically asked, is the board the right group to be spearheading this review process? I can tell you there are challenges associated with it. Your board, you're working with these things, and you're providing the review for the executive director. It's not a conflict of interest, but I can tell you it gets,
As a volunteer board, it's a heavy lift.
it's a heavy lift for individuals, and it's not necessarily everyone's expertise. I can tell you, Jihei and Jess did a fantastic job, but I think that they were especially skilled in this department, and if we were to have people who had less time in the future or less experience within this realm, it would be an even larger ask, and probably with results that might be a little bit less useful.
So the potential options, as I understand them, are an outside consultant leading the process, us continuing to do it as a board, or potentially working with city HR, but I actually don't think that's an option, and I wanted to kind of look to you guys to see if that was a thing.
The city HR would be doing something similar to what you've done. So as an example, when city council goes to evaluate me after 12 months, there'll be a 360 with the entire city government workforce. And, you know, it is what it is. So the city workforce is a different situation than here. 800 people don't even see me every day to know whether I'm doing this or I'm doing that. But they will be asked for their perspective, and that's fair. The city council will do the same thing. You know, from their perspective, what have they seen? What do they like? What would they like to see changed? And then there'll be a meeting. The only difference is the meeting for me will be on the city council docket. And this is our review of the city administrator. This is what we're doing. Normally, that is also the conversation where salary adjustments are discussed. And so I don't know what the plan is here, but that's just how the city does it. Your points are well taken about it being a heavy lift. I could tell from my own communication with Jihei and Jess, they were putting a lot of time and effort into it.
Yes, they were.
And every board doesn't have the luxury of that.
Right.
So we could decide it based on the point in time where we are and what the board is. If we determine that we don't really have people on the board, we either have the time or the skill to do it, then you could hire it out. There's nothing wrong with it. It costs you a little money. People that do it, they charge some quite a bit. But it's an avenue that's open to us. If we think we want to, I would simply suggest we make sure there's room in the budget to cover it. If we think we want to take on that kind of an expense.
You know, for my part, I think it would be, the process would be better served and led by a third party. And, you know, if we take the city process as kind of an analogy, you know, council
No, they hired out.
They hired out. So, you know, they're receiving the information post-process and making decisions or providing direction, much as we should in this instance. You know, to Tyler's point, I think it does get a little hairy to actually be on the board and conducting the review. So I would be in favor of seeking an alternative third party to lead the process. I don't think we can, in good conscience, act. Hopefully this isn't as intensive in the future because some of the groundwork has been laid, and thank you again to Gia and Jess for so doing, but no matter what, there's going to be some time-intensive, labor-intensive items around this, you know, but I think we owe it to Jeff, to ourselves, and to the city to conduct a thorough and professional process that everybody has, which we're getting to, but I think that's, I wouldn't want to ask the board to, or certain individual board members to spearhead this repeatedly as an annual process.
Yeah, one aspect that I'd like to raise as well is this process, while we could have the board lead it again, what I would point out is that because the process itself puts a lot of burden on volunteers on the board, it also creates tension between members of the board because some people are doing a lot, some people don't have as much time, and like any group project, tensions arise when different people are carrying different loads, and I think that creates fissures on the board that don't need to exist. And for sort of the health of the board, I would also support seeking an outside consultant. The only way I would sort of feel more comfortable not seeking an outside consultant is if we understand and people sort of buy in and accept the load of the process from a very early start.
Or manage, as we've talked about up to now, manage it as a full board instead of in the AC or with individuals. And, you know, as Sarah points out, that's a full board's job anyway. So having these discussions and moving forward as a larger group would, I think, neutralize a lot of it.
So if I can jump in, it was way more work than what was initially presented to me when I took the work. And when I took the work was taken because nobody else was offering to do it, okay? So, if I remember correctly, during the discussion for hiring, the entire board agreed that we needed better systems, better processes, and better guidance for the new ED coming in. And then there was no discussion after that for a couple months. And then when the 6-month review was agreed, I believe it was agreed as the entire board. And then to not have anybody volunteer to work on that, it was just like we made decisions and then there's no action coming from it. And then, and I really try to make the process open because we were sort of making the sausage when there was no sausage to be made. And I reached out to Jeff every step of the way, the staff, the lawyers, and I reached out to board members through the board meetings, and then you guys got updates on the processes, not just the result. And I didn't hear a lot of feedback from the board members other than the people who are actively working on it. And to come back to it and then have it questioned that why did we do a 6-month goal is incredibly discouraging. Incredibly discouraging. There's no way I am going to be participating in the 12-month goal review, whether it's done internally or externally. Having said that, there's a lot of processes already built in. We have the 360 review, we have the job expectations, we have the list of to-dos built by the staff that was already presented to Jeff. If somebody in the board, somebody else, or another committee wants to take over, I think opportunity is there for you to do the work. I would support the third party coming in to do it, and I really wish we had this conversation before we agreed to do the 6-month review. because when I took the board position and the amount of work that needed to go in and the ball was rolling so it couldn't be stopped is disruptive to my work life that I actually get paid for.
I think we're also, just to give us the full context, the period of seeking executive director replacement was long and challenging for the board. And I think there was a level of, I don't know, fatigue coupled with a board whose size is dwindling, where we need to continue to add members. I think I'm also very supportive that we did the 6-month review. I think it was very helpful. I think coming out of this, there is the potential for us to do it, to do the review at the 12-month period as a board, but there is a lot of opportunity there to hire out.
And I think what I want to point out is that whether we do it ourselves at 12-month period or get a third party, we need increased engagement from everybody on the board, because these these discussions happen, and then everybody agrees to do a 6-month goal review, and then I don't want to hear about it after the fact. Oh, maybe we shouldn't have done that, or maybe we should have been more engaged and had a bigger discussion when the decision is being made. I also want to throw it out there that I had to encourage people to fill out stuff. I had to extend the deadlines because people didn't fill stuff out. I had published the deadlines way at a time and still have people come and ask, like, when are we doing this? Like, we're not even processing and actively, impression that I got, my personal impression that I got was that board members are not actively engaged to make decisions and to jump in and have proper discussions and communications when it needs to happen. And that problem is going to continue whether we do the review or a third party does the review.
So, let me just say for the record, I appreciate the comments that you made, and if my questioning of our process or timing has in any way offended you, I apologize for that, because I'm simply commenting on the work part of it, not discounting the amount of effort that you put into it, not questioning your ability to do that. I was responding to a question on the floor, but if anything that I've said is received personally or as an affront to your effort, then I apologize, because that clearly was not my intention.
No, not at all. It's not that. It's just that I hate wasting time and I hate wasting effort. And if discussions were more in depth in the beginning, then I wouldn't have to put in all the effort. I
Understood.
know the process that we go together was the best one we can with the limited time and resources and lack of precedence that's given to us. And I think the result that came out of it created really great discussions out of it. So I'm not personally affronted. I'm just do not want to waste any more time and do not want to repeat the same problems again, because if we are not actively engaged, if the level of engagement from the board members are the way it is before, then it won't matter who performs the review.
Understood.
I appreciate you elevating the concerns. That was something that we talked about at EC too, was how to have a more robust process moving forward. And for me, I think that's the conversation that we're gonna have the next few months.
Thanks, Sarah. Raising.
Comment. I want to say I appreciate all the work very much. I think I speak for staff here that we know it was a lot of work and we appreciate it.
Thank you.
I feel like going forward, something that the board might consider is staff's role in supporting these types of things. These are rare things. We don't do this very often.
And given that we don't have an HR, and you made that offer before, which we always appreciated, given that we don't have an internal HR department, one of the things that we talked about process-wise early on was making sure that the board really understood, like, getting our arms around this entire process. So that was an intentional decision made, not one that's intended to continue indefinitely. Plus, that has no legs, like that can't live in future boards. It requires an institutional memory that doesn't work for public boards and commissions. So if I can pivot a little bit to a next step, we're talking about an outside person perhaps doing this, but I don't think we have enough information. We need for sure to know cost, starting from knowing cost. So thinking a little bit about time, we're at 6 months right now, 12 months is January, which is also 5 minutes, given how fast things go. So if I could suggest figuring out some information, perhaps inviting some information on third party, leading this process either at, I think, the next EC, because if we wait until the following full board, that's September, and that feels a little long. So I just want to propose that as a next step, an information gathering step before we make a full decision about who leads the process.
Sounds good. In terms of information gathering, be seeing the firms, reaching out. I imagine we've got an idea of firms that do this already, and sourcing that, getting costs.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be a full RFP, but if we can look at other similar proposals,
Right.
Local government areas,
Right.
service areas, that would be useful.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah, the September meeting is far off. What are we at, July 20th already? So for that next EC, we would look to compile some of that information. I can sort of take the lead on bringing that. If anybody else wants to bring any, feel free. At the next EC, we can also discuss FMI. Look for Mr. Watson to bring his responses to the requests that we've made. And we don't need to leave this with a decision on next steps for the 12-month review, but we'll talk in the EC and then have a larger discussion at the next board meeting with what the EC discusses and finds out. We all feel comfortable?
When's the next regular board meeting?
August 3rd?
No, we're gonna have an August.
Oh, we cancel
So
it.
September 7th is the next EC and board meeting. There is-
Okay, well, I guess that's what it is, but just making sure we have the information.
Yeah.
We schedule it.
Ahead of that, this might be a great time, if thanks again, Sarah, for the offer of assistance. Could we maybe have staff look into who the city uses for senior level reviews and look at what that contract is give us some idea of what the outside consultant would be?
Yeah.
I'm sure those contracts are available and, we can at least get some, hey, this is what a general.
I think that's a great idea, Michael. Would you be willing to work with the staff and come back with an answer?
What's that?
Would you be able to communicate with the staff and finding out who the city uses and then coming back to the answer things like that?
I would be able to do that.
Great.
Sarah, can I work with you on that?
Absolutely.
Do you know who to ask at the city?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I believe we have covered,
Done the things.
we've done the things we set out to do today. Do we all feel comfortable that we've done the things we set out to do today?
Good.
Yeah? Any final comments?
Enjoy the art fair.
Yes.
Enjoy the extra time because I have like 55 minutes left in my day, so
That's right, there we go.
Still telling
I'm gonna get a snack.
There you go.
All right. So, do we have any public comment? Seeing none, do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Yeah, so
So moved, second?
Second.
Second. All those in favor of adjournment of this meeting, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.